Let's cut out by watching and listening to the Doors do a new song called A Soft Parade.
You cannot petition the Lord with prayer!
Most people think they already know the story of the Soft Parade. They'll tell you it's the Horns album, the overproduced album, the one Jim didn't care about, or even the weakest Doors record. But that version of history is painfully incomplete. The real story behind the Doors' fourth studio album is deeper, more dramatic, more human, and far more revealing than the myths that surround it. If anything, The Soft Parade is the album that exposes every crack, every ambition, every fear, and every internal battle that defined the Doors at their turning point. For me personally, Wild Child, Touch Me, and the title song are in regular rotation in my collection. I didn't care for Wishful Sinful until I heard the live version, and that made me appreciate it more. I love the Soft Parade and how it seems to go through several different genres of music. At one point, it even sounds like disco. By the time 1969 arrived, the Doors were exhausted in a way that most bands never survive. They had put out 3 albums in a blistering 18 months, while touring almost non-stop across the United States and Europe. Studio sessions bled into live shows, which bled into interviews, airports, rehearsals, and headlines. The endless cycle didn't allow for recovery, reflection, or creative reset. Their previous album, Waiting for the Sun, had taken a huge toll on the band emotionally. Sessions dragged on for months. The group fought constantly, and entire planned suites, like the infamous Celebration of the Lizard, fell apart under the pressure of recording. This exhaustion wasn't just physical. Jim Morrison was fighting battles on multiple fronts. He hated his growing reputation as a sex symbol and frontman caricature. He was drinking heavier than ever. The fame he once flirted with now felt suffocating. Reporters were obsessed with his looks, his antics, and his unpredictability. Not the poetry or the ideas he cared about. This made him increasingly volatile inside the studio, where he wanted rawness, intensity, danger. The exact opposite of what producer Paul Rothchild was pushing for. Rothchild, one of the most ambitious producers of the era, believed the Doors had hit a creative ceiling and needed to break new ground if they wanted to remain important. He pushed them toward complex orchestrations, horns, woodwinds, strings, layered vocals, and polished arrangements that were designed to elevate their sound into something grander. Ray Manzarek supported the idea, seeing it as a natural extension of the band's theatrical roots. Robbie Krieger actually flourished under these new conditions, stepping into a more dominant songwriting role than on any other Doors album. But Jim Morrison hated it. He felt the new direction was too pop-oriented, too clean, too controlled. He didn't want to be a crooner backed by horn sections. He didn't want to sound like Vegas or Broadway, and he definitely didn't want to follow a producer's blueprint when he felt the band should return to their roots. That tension shaped every moment of the recording process. There were days Morrison simply didn't show up to the studio. Days where Rothchild, furious, worked endlessly with Krieger and Manzarek on arrangements while the lead singer was drinking somewhere, miles away. Days where the band fought openly. Sometimes about songwriting credits, sometimes about the artistic direction, sometimes simply due to exhaustion. Even the songs themselves became symbolic battlegrounds. Krieger wrote Touch Me, Wishful Sinful, and Tell All the People, while Morrison delivered the darker, more surreal pieces like Shaman's Blues and the sprawling title track. It was as if the album was split cleanly between two visions, one polished and orchestrated, the other raw and haunted. Yet despite all the chaos, The Soft Parade contains some of the most striking music the Doors ever recorded. Touch Me was the closest the band ever came to a full pop hit, and the sax solo by Curtis Amy became one of the most recognizable instrumental moments in their entire catalog. It showcased something people often overlook. The Doors could successfully inhabit multiple identities. They didn't have to be chained to the psychedelic gloom of their first album. They could be soulful, stylish, and radio-friendly when they wanted to be. But Morrison struggled with how the public interpreted it. He didn't want their biggest hit of 1969 to make him look like a lounge singer. Then there's Shaman's Blues, a track that feels like it could have been recorded in a smoky backroom seance. Morrison's lyrics are cryptic, accusatory, mystical, some of the most enigmatic he ever wrote. The guitar and organ lines slither like a living thing, and the whole song sounds like a spell being cast. In Wild Child, Morrison turns the mirror directly on himself, writing a self-portrait that's rugged, mocking, honest, and explosive. It's one of the purest windows into his head during this turbulent period. And Wishful Sinful, one of Krieger's compositions, is lush and cinematic, drenched in strings that would have been unthinkable on the band's debut. But nothing on the album reveals the band's internal turmoil or their ambition, quite like the soft parade suite itself. Almost 9 minutes long, it's a ride through Morrison's fractured psyche. Part whispered poetry, part blues, part theatrical breakdown, part fever dream. The track feels like Jim is trying to purge every tangled emotion he's been carrying. Frustration, confusion, spiritual longing, paranoia, and a longing for innocence. The line, "You cannot petition the Lord with prayer,"
Petition the Lord with prayer.
You cannot petition the Lord with prayer!
has become iconic, not just because of its delivery, but because of its symbolism. It marks a moment where Morrison seems to confront everything he never resolved: faith, rebellion, authority, and the emptiness that fame had left behind. At the time, critics absolutely did not understand any of this. Major outlets like Rolling Stone dismissed the album as overly orchestrated and bloated. Fans were confused by the horns and strings. The counterculture, which was quickly turning darker and more cynical by 1969, didn't have patience for theatricality. Psychedelia was dying. Woodstock was about to turn into Altamont. The Beatles were fracturing. The Stones were descending into mayhem. Everything that defined the idealism of the mid-60s was breaking apart. And the Soft Parade captured that shift almost too well. It was an album born from confusion, ambition, exhaustion, and artistic disagreement. And the world wasn't ready to process an album that complicated. What's fascinating is how much this album shaped the rest of the Doors' career. After pushing themselves to the brink with heavy production, endless overdubs, and high-cost sessions, the band snapped back in the opposite direction the next year. Morrison Hotel was lean, bluesy, gritty, and stripped down, almost defiantly so. It was the musical equivalent of a detox, and Jim Morrison's growing resentment of Rothschild's perfectionism directly influenced the raw, live-in-the-room feel of L.A. Woman. Without the tension and frustration of the Soft Parade, those albums may never have emerged in that form. And then there's the long-term legacy. For decades, older fans and critics treated the album like an outlier or a misstep. But something has changed. Over the last decade or two, younger listeners who grew up in a world where genre blending is normal, where artists mix jazz with rock, pop with psychedelia, orchestral with electronic, don't hear the Soft Parade as a betrayal. They hear it as adventurous. Musicians today admire its boldness. Producers appreciate its ambition. And critics have begun reevaluating it as one of the most experimental, fascinating albums in the Doors catalog.
The resulting song is considered to be one of the most musically diverse.
Sure, now we made it sure and clear that the Doors is one of the best bands ever.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the best bands to do it.
The title track, once dismissed as indulgent, is now seen by many as a lost psychedelic epic, a piece that belongs beside the ambitious suites of the era, even if it's stranger and more fragmented. Songs like Shaman's Blues and Wild Child have aged remarkably well, gaining appreciation for their rawness and complexity. And Touch Me, depending on who you ask, may be the most timeless hit the band ever recorded. In the end, the Soft Parade is not the Doors at their most unified, but it might be the Doors at their most human. It's the sound of a band confronting change, feeling themselves splinter, and still pushing forward with everything they had left. It's the album that shows their ambition, their conflict, their exhaustion, and their creative fearlessness all at once. It's messy, theatrical, experimental, emotional, and brutally honest. And that's why it remains essential. Not because it's perfect, but because it reveals more about the Doors' evolution than any other record they made. More than 50 years later, the Soft Parade stands as a misunderstood turning point, a crossroads where the band fought for their identity, challenged themselves, risked everything, and unknowingly set the stage for the two classic albums that would follow. It isn't just a misunderstood album. It's the Rosetta Stone for understanding who the Doors really were at the moment their world and the entire 1960s dream was falling apart.